Thank you for joining me on Veterans Day. I had hoped last year that by this time we would be meeting in person, but in consultation with staff and advice from the CDC, our celebration of Veterans Day will again, unfortunately, be virtual. I maintain hope that next year, hopefully for Memorial Day, we will meet in person. Veterans Day is when we pause to appreciate all who have served as members of the U.S. Armed Forces, whatever role they played or the result of their service, so long as they were faithful to the oath they took when they entered the military. In past years, I have focused my remarks on Veterans Day on the role of ordinary veterans, often enlisted, often who never saw combat, because they are often overlooked for the important role they played in military success. This year I will focus on leaders. Some were leaders while in the military, some later, but they all share a common trait. Going back in history, the first of these leaders I will discuss is George Henry Thomas, who, though a native of Virginia, served in the U.S. Army during the Civil War. He had an amazing array of nicknames, including the Rock of Chickamauga, the Sledge of Nashville, and Slow Trot Thomas. I'm heavily quoting the story of how he got the title the Rock of Chickamauga from Thomas's entry on Wikipedia. I found out about him elsewhere, but this was a good summary. At the Battle of Chickamauga on September 19, 1863, he held a desperate position against Bragg's onslaught while the Union line on his right collapsed. Thomas rallied broken and scattered units together on Horseshoe Ridge to prevent a significant Union defeat from becoming a hopeless rout. Future President James Garfield, a field officer for the Army of the Cumberland, visited Thomas during the battle, carrying orders from U.S. Major General Rosecrans to retreat. When Thomas said he would have to stay behind to ensure the Army's safety, Garfield told Rosecrans that Thomas was, quote, standing like a rock. After the battle, he became widely known by the nickname the Rock of Chickamauga, representing his determination to hold a vital position against strong odds. And from the same source, on how he got his nickname, the Sledge of Nashville. At the Battle of Franklin on November 30th, 1864, a large part of Thomas's force, under command of Major General John M. Schofield, dealt Confederate General Hood a strong defeat and held him in check long enough to cover the concentration of Union forces in Nashville. At Nashville, Thomas had to organize his forces, which had been drawn from all parts of the West, and which included many young troops and even quartermaster employees. He declined to attack until his army was ready and the ice covering the ground had melted enough for his men to move. The North, including General Grant himself, now General-in-Chief of all Union armies, grew impatient at the delay. Major General John A. Logan was sent with an order to replace Thomas, and soon afterwards Grant started a journey from City Point, Virginia, to take command in person. Thomas attacked on December 15, 1864, in the Battle of Nashville and effectively destroyed Hood's command in 2 days of fighting. Thomas left the Army after the end of the war, even refusing to lead it when offered that position by President Andrew Johnson. He died in 1870, and while his Virginia family refused to attend the funeral, Generals Sherman and Grant did attend. Moving forward to a much more recent leader, I'll move on now to U.S. Navy Captain Brett Crozier. Crozier is a Naval Academy graduate and started his career as an aviator. After completing naval nuclear training, he served as an officer on several aircraft carriers, rising to commanding officer of the USS Theodore Roosevelt on November 1, 2019, a position he held in March of 2020. I think everyone remembers March of 2020. In March of 2020, there was an outbreak of COVID-19 aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt. Again quoting from Wikipedia, this time the article on the COVID-19 outbreak. COVID-19 was detected on the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt in March 2020 while she was at sea. Affected crew members were evacuated and the ship was ordered to Guam. The captain, Brett Crozier, wanted most of the crew removed from the ship to prevent the spread of disease, but his superiors were reluctant. And let me dig into the words were reluctant a little bit. The New York Times on April 12, 2020 has an article that says this. On March 30th, after 4 days of rebuffs from his superior, Captain Crozier sat down to compose an email. Quote, "Sailors don't need to die," unquote, he wrote to 20 other people, all Navy personnel in the Pacific, asking for help. A Naval Academy graduate with nearly 30 years of military service, the captain knew the email would most likely end his career, his friends said in interviews. The military prizes its chain of command, and the appropriate course would have been for the captain to continue to push his superiors for action. He hit send anyway. Picking back up on Wikipedia, after several days, Crozier emailed 3 of his superior officers and 7 other Navy captains, outlining a plan for the ship to be largely evacuated because the virus could not be contained on board. The letter leaked to the press, and the next day the Navy ordered most of the crew taken ashore, but the captain was relieved of command by Acting Secretary of the Navy Thomas Maudley. Maudley's order was controversial, and his later speech to the crew aboard Theodore Roosevelt was criticized. Maudley resigned a few days later. By mid-April, hundreds of crew members, including Crozier, had tested positive for the virus, and 1 had died. In the end, more than 1,271 cases were diagnosed among the sailors on the USS Theodore Roosevelt. Captain Crozier was relieved of command of the Roosevelt on April 2, 2020. He currently serves in a shore position in San Diego. Both of these leaders had a common theme that caught my attention. They are willing to push back on orders, to put their careers on their line, to speak back to authority in order to support their sailors or their soldiers and to achieve their mission. Thomas refused to retreat when ordered to do so at Chickamauga because he knew the impact it would have on the Army. He delayed obeying orders to attack in Nashville, almost being relieved of command because he knew the weather was not right and his soldiers were not prepared. Crozier sent an email outside the chain of command to address the COVID outbreak on his ship, knowing that it would probably cost him his career, and in fact, he did not allow other officers on the ship to sign it to protect their careers. The letter worked and got his sailors the relief they needed. I may well be the only person speaking today who is drawing positive attention to military officers resisting or pushing back on orders from their superiors, but I think all organizations work better, to a point, when employees speak up when something is wrong. I will point out very carefully that I think both men were adhering to their oaths of office when they did what they did. This brings me to the 3rd veteran who I will recognize today. He is not particularly famous, does not have a Wikipedia page, but we all know him as a leader in our town. I know a lot about his leadership here, having worked closely with him for many years, but I don't know very much about his service while in the Navy. While working with this veteran has not always been easy, I absolutely and always know that he is focused on delivering on his department's mission and on taking care of all of those who work for him. As with the other veterans I discussed, he has always let those of us in leadership know the impacts of possible policies on his staff, and on issues external to the town that could also cause problems to those in his department. I appreciate that candor, and I have learned a lot from working with him. I'm taking this opportunity to recognize him during today's Veterans Day remarks, because we will lose him to a well-deserved retirement later this week. I am, of course, speaking of Police Chief David Morris. It has been an honor for me to serve the people of Riverdale Park in cooperation with David Morris over the last decade, and I know that his experiences in the Navy guided him throughout his career after that. We will miss him, and I wish him well in his life ahead. I'll wrap up my remarks today by thanking all veterans, living and dead, for the sacrifices they have made to keep our military ready and able to defend the United States from all adversaries, foreign and domestic. And I particularly want to recognize all of those veterans who have bravely resisted or disobeyed an order, accepting the consequences, because the order was contrary to their sworn oath to support and defend the U.S. Constitution. They truly are all heroes. Thank you.